Hello everyone, and welcome to Imperialism. What is it, and why should we be against it? A panel hosted by the Platypus Affiliated Society for our West Coast Conference. My name is Drew, and I'll be moderating this discussion, as Ishmael said. The Platypus Affiliated Society, established in December 2006, organizes reading groups, public fora, research, and journalism focused on the problems and tasks inherited from the old, the 1920s to 30s, new 1960s to 70s, and the post-political 1980s to 90s left for the possibilities of emancipatory politics today. Our members here at UC Irvine hold a weekly discussion group on contemporary topics Friday evenings at 5:30 p.m. at Ant Hill Pub and Grill. I'm not exactly sure what that is.
The coffee breaks, yeah.
Yeah, those are the coffee breaks, yeah. They also host a reading group, Introduction to Revolutionary Marxism, on Thursday evenings at 6:30 in Humanities Hall. These are open to students and the public. If you're interested in hearing more, please find me or Ishmael after the event has ended. Each of our panelists have been invited to present an opening statement that can be up to 12 minutes each. They will then have 3 minutes to respond to one another. The rest of our 2-hour slot will be devoted to audience Q&A. And the panel will run for around 2 hours, so that means it ends hopefully around 2:30 p.m. For those that wish to continue the discussion, please join us at the food court for lunch afterwards. I will now introduce our panelists in speaking order, so that's from the end of the table to where I'm sitting. So Julie is a member of the Spartacist League, and then Dr. Mychal Odom is an assistant professor of Black Studies at SD Mesa College and a contributor to Burning Spear newspaper, the oldest Black Power newspaper in continuous print and the official organ of the African People's Socialist Party. And then next to me we have Jonah Henkle, a member of the Orange County Club of the CPUSA, the Communist Party USA, and former organizer for the New Jersey Young Communist League. He is a PhD student in the Department of Comparative Literature at UC Irvine and a member of UAW 4811. The prompt for today's discussion is as follows. From Venezuela to Palestine, the left invokes the rallying cry of imperialism to oppose or support the actions of various state powers. This evokes disparate historical memories, including the anti-war protests of the 2000s and 1960s, the Falklands War, and World War I, which Marxists call the Imperialist War. Understanding the relation of these events requires clarification on the development that is imperialism. To that end, we ask panelists, what is imperialism? How should Marxists critique it? Has imperialism changed in the century since Lenin's pamphlet? And does overcoming it mean an overcoming of capitalism? And then we'll start with Julie then.
Hello, can you hear me? Great. Well, I'd like to thank Ishmael and Platypus for inviting my organization to today's panel. The question is, what is imperialism? It's a very broad question. I'm going to just focus on Venezuela and Palestine. So the recent attack on Venezuela and the kidnapping of Nicolas Maduro by US forces is the perfect example of what imperialist military intervention looks like. But imperialism is not just naked military might. It is also the outgrowth of the economic system of monopoly capitalism and international finance capital. And that's why we think you cannot separate the two. They're both built on the brutal exploitation of the world's working masses. Since neither imperialism nor capitalism can be reformed to be more humane, revolutionary Marxists think we have to smash capitalism to eliminate imperialism. To do this requires a fight against the dead-end policy of building liberal alliances with capitalist politicians, who are enemies, pushed by unionist leaders and the reformist left. So we think the reason Trump is so viciously attacking workers, immigrants, and other minorities at home and abroad is because his government represents a fundamental shift in the strategy of US imperialism. While previously the US had made an effort to cover up its rapacious rule with liberal ideals and institutions, so like lying about bringing human rights and democracy to the world, today under Trump, US capitalism is nakedly using its mailed fist to dominate the world in an attempt to reverse and slow its economic decline. Trump is trying to reindustrialize the US for war, and further squeeze its allies and neo-colonies in order to better isolate and choke its main target, which is the People's Republic of China. So how do we defeat Trump and US imperialism? Where is the working class? Why is it missing in action? Well, it's because the reformist left has spent the last few decades building coalitions with Democratic Party liberals, even while they were trampling workers and the poor all across the globe, covering up the fact that the economic conditions for the vast majority were getting worse. This alienated the working class and pushed them to the right, many into the arms of Trump. So we think the main obstacle to moving forward is the left's practice of building liberal coalitions with our class enemies. A big reason the labor movement has not come out so far to defend immigrants here or against US attacks abroad is because the current union leaderships push the lie that what is good for imperialism is good for the working class. The left has consistently supported these sellout labor leaders and allowed them to tie workers to the Democrats and its liberal institutions. So one example of many that I can think of is how the Democratic Socialists of America, the DSA, works in the Democratic Party, got out the vote for Mamdani, as well as phone banking for votes for Gavin Newsom's Proposition 50 to gerrymander more seats for the Democrats in California against Texas for the upcoming midterms, and lying to the masses that this was the way to stop Trump. Another example is in the last presidential elections when the Party of Socialism and Liberation, or the PSL, ran for president against Harris and Trump. Because the PSL drew a class line, calling for a workers' party and to defend Palestine, we called for a vote to the PSL, but with criticisms. We knew they'd capitulate on the ground to their liberal coalition partners, and one place they did this was at the PYM, Palestinian Youth Movement Conference, to defend the Palestinians in Detroit. To preserve their alliance with the liberals at this event, the PSL consciously did not have their own presidential candidate address the crowd, and instead criminally gave the stage to Rashida Tlaib, a member of the Democratic Party who was at that time waging war against Palestine, sabotaging their own presidential campaign. No wonder the Palestinians are worse off today. Another opportunity to build a leadership against the ruling class was lost. So while it is good that the PSL and the DSA called for protests last weekend to fight Trump's war against Venezuela and the ICE murder of Renee Good in Minnesota, the problem is that these demonstrations were built on a liberal pacifist basis instead of on a revolutionary working class basis. So the reformist calls by the PSL, DSA, and CPUSA for no war on Venezuela, and their demands that Congress pass a war powers resolution, are pacifist calls on the ruling class to be more humane. They do not take a side to defend Venezuela, which is what we really need. Calls on the Democrats for UN intervention and for upholding international law are a waste of time and actually disarm the oppressed. The Democrats' main objection to the war in Venezuela is that they didn't get to vote for it first. Don't forget, it was the Democratic Party of Palestinian genocide that imposed sanctions on Venezuela, which is an act of war, and Biden put a $25 million bounty on Maduro's head. So this attack on Venezuela and Maduro is bipartisan. Any and all attempted alliances with some mythical progressive wing of the capitalist class only chains workers and minorities to their exploiters and makes it impossible to combat imperialism. And that's why we're here where we are today. So we think to win the working class, the left must oppose liberal coalitions with the capitalists. We must lay out a revolutionary socialist politics showing workers and the oppressed why they have a material interest in fighting against their capitalist masters, not allying with them. Pulling out unions to protest against US imperialism would be a big step forward to build labor actions against war and for an anti-imperialist alliance with the masses of Latin America. To accomplish this, we need a struggle for a new revolutionary leadership of the unions. Today, our job is to fight for workers and the oppressed peoples across the globe to take a clear side with Venezuela against US imperialist aggression and fight to release Maduro now. This means defending Maduro without giving him any political support. Another key part of struggling to defeat imperialism is to fight for US workers to take up the defense of oppressed nations like Mexico, Colombia, Venezuela, and others. We need to create a united front against US imperialism throughout Latin America. The international working class, including US workers, should demonstrate and go on strike wherever possible against US imperialism. Any blow against US interests would give much needed assistance to the oppressed here and everywhere. The attack on Venezuela is not only aimed at Cuba and the rest of Latin America, it's also aimed at China. China is a recipient of the majority of Venezuela's oil exports and has major investments and loans in the region. We think the Communist Party of China should resist US imperialism, one, by using its economic might to push back against Trump's tariffs, like by stopping the flow of rare earths, two, by sending some of its trillions in foreign currency to help Cuba rebuild, and three, by using the military power that it created to defend itself against Japanese and US aggression to resist the moves by US imperialism in the Caribbean and the Persian Gulf. This would protect the rest of the world from the United States. But the leaders of the CPC resist doing this because they actually embrace the dying liberal world order instead of fighting for national liberation or international communism, which is what we really need. So we in the SL and ICL defend China, a bureaucratically deformed worker state, against US imperialism, while politically opposing the Stalinist bureaucracy. We want the Chinese working class to take political power away from the CPC bureaucrats in a pro-socialist uprising and extend the economic gains of the 1949 Chinese Revolution to the rest of Asia. So what that means is we have to forge revolutionary leaderships to unite workers and the oppressed, to lead the struggle against US imperialism. And here in the belly of the imperialist beast, to take any step forward requires a fight outside and against the Democratic Party. Internationally, it would be fatal for any of us to place hope in the Chinese Stalinists, Russian oligarchs, nationalists, or social democrats of any type. None of them seek to overthrow US hegemony, and all are opposed to a working class revolution, which is why they're all incapable of waging a consistent struggle against imperialism. So the freedom of the world's toilers from oppression and exploitation will advance and succeed only under the banner of revolutionary Marxism. All with Venezuela, down with US imperialism. Thank you so much.
And next would be Mychal of the APSI.
I'm Mychal. Some people know me as Maximilla Odom, the African People's Socialist Party and the Burning Spear newspaper. As noted, I'm also an Africana Studies professor, but I'm, of course, not speaking on behalf of my department, just to say that. But I am speaking as a contributor to the African People's Socialist Party, the Burning Spear newspaper, which is the longest running Black Power newspaper in continuous print. There are some copies back there that you all can have for free. There's a copy on, the ideology that I'm bringing forward, which is that of African internationalism. Like, there's a lot been written on African internationalism over the last 50 years, but at its core, African internationalism represents really the 600-year anti-colonial process of for African liberation. Right, so we understand it as a dialectical and historical materialist theory, but there are some clear departures from Marxism and organized Marxist organizations that we take, and it is central to that is the question of colonialism and imperialism. So it's very important. We do believe that African people within the U.S. and elsewhere suffer primarily against colonialism, imperialism. So there's a way through which, we generally talk about left versus right, and even workers or the bourgeoisie versus the proletariat. We see the central contradiction that we face being the colonized versus the colonizer. So in some ways, we can even, instead of thinking about left versus right, we could think about up versus down, right? People, and that being the central question In that instance, I want to salute Chairman Omali Shatela. He's the chairman of the African People's Socialist Party, the architect of African internationalism. But in some ways, even what I always say, and this is saluting the leadership and the intervention that Chairman brought to African internationalism, is that, like, Newton didn't invent gravity, right? But he identified it. He outlined physics, and therefore sort of the last 300 plus years has been scientifically building on top of that. So when it comes to the African anti-colonial tradition, you can see elements of African internationalism in practice going all the way back to the early 15th century, when the first Africans began to fight against European colonial domination. And to some extent, there's some scholars who even go even further back than that. I mean, you have Africans inside the different Africans waging anti-colonial struggle inside, against Roman conquest, against Arab conquest and things like that, but this isn't to be sort of reductive and to suggest that sort of all imperialism is the same, right? Clearly what we're talking about is imperialism and colonialism as it relates to the development of capitalism. So I think that's something to really talk about as well, because you guys be, well, imperialism, colonialism has been around for forever, right? And to me, that's a very just a reductive position. It's actually a defeatist position, because if it's been around for forever, then why the hell you struggle against it, right? That's the same thing. People say the same things around feminism, around patriarchy and things like that. And there's people I love. I love, sort of some of these liberal authors like Barbara Ehrenreich and things like that, who write about these ideas of patriarchy and all these systems being around for forever. Well, if they're around for forever, then why the hell fight against it, right? Gravity's been around for forever, but if you don't have a damn a parachute in your backpack, don't step off the cliff. You know what I mean? But even in that's a scientific response to something that's been around for forever, right? And that's what we're talking about here. Is that. So I just want to salute Chairman Omali Yeshitela. This is like 60 years of the Uhuru movement. The Uhuru movement came out of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. It was in 1966 that he had established the SNCC branch in St. Petersburg, Florida. 2 years later, that turned into a Black Power organization by the name of JOMO, the Junta of Militant Organizations. JOMO in Kikuyu means burning spear. Of course, it came from Jomo Kenyatta, for if those who know him. At that time, he was pretty much assumed to be a member of the Mau Mau and things of that sort. Subsequently, it was clearly understood that he was not a member of the Mau Mau, and in fact, despite being trained in the Soviet Union, it was really a force of neocolonialism on the continent of Africa, as is his descendants and his party and things like that. But nevertheless, that's where our paper gets its name from. In 1972, JOMO, as well as two other black working class organizations in Florida, came together and formed the African People's Socialist Party with the express purpose of reviving and completing the Black Power movement. How am I doing on time?
You're doing all right. I think.
What am I looking at?
You're looking at around like 5 minutes. So
okay,
far.
Perfect. That's all I need. And we're answering all three of the questions right now.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, so I just want to say this. So I wanted to lay that out to explain the important interventions that you'll hear today. I want to say that sort of the interventions that you hear today are of absolute importance, because the question, of course, the burning questions of our generation is what is to be done, right? And those still are the burning questions 120 plus years later, about what we need to do. And what we need to do is to wage anti-colonial struggle. So we know that Lenin argued that imperialism was the highest expression of capitalism. Imperialism, he writes, is capitalism at the stage of development at which the dominance of monopolies and finance capital is established, in which the export of capital has acquired pronounced importance, in which the division of the world among the international trust has begun, in which the division of all territories of the globe among the biggest capitalist powers has been completed. And so he goes on to identify three characteristics of imperialism. And in many ways, as African internationalists, we don't disagree with those characteristics. He says that it's monopoly capitalism, talks about it being parasitic or decaying and moribund. However, we do believe that he has the relationship backwards. We do understand that in a Marxist analysis, there's, of course, despite the contradictions, capitalism had been at least seen as a progressive force, moving society from fascism to not fascism, sorry, from feudalism to capitalism. But we know for Africa that's the complete opposite, right? We know for Africa and other colonized people that's the complete opposite, right? So we know that Africa it took Africa from a better position to a worse off position, right? So we define imperialism as the worldwide system of brigandage by white Europeans who brought the entire non-white world under its rule, as it created the parasitic capitalist economic world order. So for us, we know that Lenin characterized. So for us, we actually say that, in fact, capitalism is the highest expression of imperialism, right? And by extension, colonialism. Right, so we refer to the system as colonial capitalism, understanding that you cannot separate one from the other. We do derive our understanding of colonialism's relationship to capitalism and by extension imperialism from the writings of Marx and Capital, who referred to the concept of primitive accumulation, in which he argues that the discovery of gold and silver in America, the extirpation of enslavement and entombment in the minds of the Aboriginal people, the beginning of the conquest and looting of the East Indies, and the turning of Africa into a warren for the hunting of black skins, signalized the rosy dawn of capitalist production. Right. So in recent years, we have even come to the point of clearly identifying colonialism as the primary mode of capitalist production. So a couple things I want to just say is that sort of Lenin is to be upheld in his sense. Though we understand Lenin having it backwards, that comes from the position of Lenin as a European or European adjacent person at that time, looking for struggle inside Europe. So it's sort of from the perspective of Europeans outward, right? This is a perspective of the colonized, right? Sitting at the center of colonial and capitalist plunder. There's a great book that came out about 5 years ago by a guy by the name of Howard French. It's called Born in Blackness, I think it's called, and it looks at the creation of the modern world and the European assault on Africa. I just want to say that even though we have disagreements with Lenin, Lenin himself understood that the voice of the colonized were so important that alongside his thesis on imperialism, he elevated M.N. Roy's thesis, right, which in many ways differed from Lenin's thesis, but still sort of advanced it, right, especially when we talk about the role of the colonized working class of the world leading in that struggle. So I would just say, I also want to say that something like 2 years before Lenin's thesis, we have W.B. Du Bois who wrote on, it was called The African Roots of War. So in the middle of the World War I, W.B. Du Bois argued that it was the scramble for Africa that had produced a World War I, and that's very important. But then, about a decade before that, he argued that the color line and what he calls the color line belts the world. He argues that the race problem in the United States is but a local phase of a world problem. So these are things that are just important. I'll just end is so last question, and then we can have this for discussion. Is this: does overcoming it mean the overcoming of capitalism? And I did have some questions around that. What is meant in this question by overcoming? And what's the relationship? What we would say is that to defeat capitalism, you have to defeat colonialism. But if you defeated capitalism, but not through the explicit anti-colonial struggle, what you could end up with is essentially just socialist colonialism. And that's not me. That's the Second International, Stuttgart, Germany, 1907, in which socialists argued for a continuance of colonialism because how would they sort of bring the, quote, backwards nations of the world into modernity? Where would they get the resources to create the socialist economies? And of course, Lenin and that whole tendency disagreed with that, but I do think that tendency does exist right now. It exists currently in the relationship of elements of the DSA. I don't know if anyone read that recent article by Jacobin that argues that capitalism was not birthed through colonialism, which we not only completely disagree with, but we see as an attack against the anti-colonial struggle of African and other colonized people all around the world. So that's just some of the stuff that hopefully I gave you enough to kick off and chew on. I look forward to the discussion later on. Thanks.
All right, and now we would have Jackson of the CPUSA.
Jonah,
sorry. Apologies.
no worries. Can everybody hear me all right?
Bring it closer.
Move my notebook. Oh, yeah. Okay. Can everybody hear me all right now? Okay, wonderful. I want to thank the Platypus Affiliated Society for organizing this event and offering a warm invitation to come and speak with you today. I'd also like to thank my co-panelists for their thoughtful remarks and all of you in the audience for your questions to come. I should also briefly say that while I'm a proud member of the Communist Party USA, to avoid any confusion, it should be noted my statements today are reflective of my own views and thinking and not necessarily that of the party. I take it as prerequisite that Marxists, people of the left, are opposed to imperialism. It would be of little use to us for me to simply polemicize on why we must oppose imperialism, a point which I presume we already have agreement. Let me instead focus on where there might be difference. Insofar as the left opposes imperialism, it does not do so uniformly. Similarly, in the time since the Second International debates on imperialism between Lenin's pamphlet, Luxemburg's accumulation of capital, Hilferding's finance capital, Kautsky's ultra-imperialism, and the Third International text by Bukharin, imperialism has come to mean different things within and outside Marxist circles. The majority of my remarks will not then be an argument on why we should oppose imperialism, but what the specifically Marxist theory of imperialism offers us. and why it is superior to other theoretical deviations. First and most importantly, imperialism must not be reduced to geopolitics. That is, imperialism for Marxists is not simply the excesses of great power politics, nor is it the violence and misbehavior of empires. Imperialism is for Marxists, or at least as Lenin understood it, a particular feature of capitalist modernity extending from the concentration of monopoly capital. I take it that many of you are familiar with Lenin's pamphlet, so I'll refrain from rehearsing its arguments here. Needless to say, Lenin's argument is complex, at least more complex than normative uses of the term imperialism would suggest. What does it mean then to reduce imperialism to geopolitics, as I have said? Let me provide some examples which I'm sure you will find familiar. There is, of course, the liberal or left liberal analysis of imperialism, whereby imperialism is merely the extra-legal use of force by one state in favor of the domination of another. You can think here of the way the Russia-Ukraine war is understood in liberal discourse as Russia's use of imperial power to seize the territory it covets in Ukraine. This is not what Marxists mean by imperialism. In fact, the Russian case is something of the opposite of what Marxists mean. Russia is a less advanced capitalist nation with an abnormally large military capacity relative to its economic power, and it's using accumulation by dispossession as a means of catching up. At least this is one potential analysis. Another example of reducing imperialism to geopolitics might strike closer to home than the last. Some Marxists, or at least some Marxists in name, have reframed imperialism on the basis of geopolitical camps. In this analysis, the US and its allies constitute a singular imperialist axis, and the states and non-state actors who oppose it are anti-imperialist. While in broad strokes this may be productive of some political utility, as a theory, its Manichaeism is impoverished. When this analysis is given a life of its own, it results in a distorted and anti-Marxist politics. Why? Marxist politics is the politics enabled by scientific socialist theory, of and for the working class. The issue with radical anti-imperialism from a Marxist point of view is that it elides class interest and thus class politics. In the campus vision, the working class of the imperialist core are crudely cast as labor aristocrats, perverting Lenin's use of the term, and class society in the nation subject to imperialist domination is left undifferentiated. The national bourgeoisie of the global South nations valorized, and the working classes of the advanced capitalist economies condemned. This is not a Marxist politics, first because it is moralistic and not scientific, and second because it forecloses on our ability to practice internationalism as a class. Lastly, I'll briefly address some new Marxist and post-Marxist theories those of you in academia might be familiar with. The debates of the early 2000s originating around Hart and Negri's Empire, which disavowed the utility of a theory of imperialism today, largely obscured the discourse on Marxism in unproductive ways. David Harvey's reduction of imperialism and the new imperialism to accumulation through dispossession is an interesting provocation, but fails to update Lenin's theories in ways that are productive to practicing anti-imperialist politics. The post-Marxist theories from Hart and Negri to Mazadra and Nielsen seem to me emblematic of theoretical errors in Apparismo and Italian communism broadly, chief among them an abandonment of traditional Marxian categories of class. Okay. Now that I've done some negative analysis, some of which you might find provocative, let me offer something in the way of a positive analysis. In other words, I've said what Marxism isn't, let me say what it is. There are many things we should oppose that are not analytically imperialism. We should oppose US-NATO militarism in general because, and this is crucial, it is harmful to the international working class. It is neither in the interest of US workers nor workers anywhere for the capitalist class to send its young people to kill one another for its political goals. That being said, this often has little to do with imperialism. In my estimation, the most valuable aspect of the Marxist theory of imperialism for Marxists today is to understand why capitalism develops unevenly, why there remain hidden abodes of non-capitalist and pre-capitalist productive relations, with violences that are often more severe than in the properly capitalist world. Why is it that some national economies remain dependent on financialized imperial cores, and why colonial and neo-colonial relations persist? The Marxist theory of imperialism has an answer for this. Overaccumulation and monopoly capitalism produces an imperialist impulse among the capitalist class. to use the repressive power of the imperialist state to free up more capital for its uses, more free capital for circulation, and more underwaged and unwaged labor to undercut domestic labor markets. Okay, why do I say the capitalist class and not the capitalist class in the imperial core? It is because the capitalist class internationally is invested in imperialism, and that has been reflected by the activity of the capitalist and rentier class in the global periphery and the collaboration of the global ruling class in imperialist exploitation. Now the polemical part. If the global capitalist class is invested in imperialism, what does it mean for the global working class to be opposed to imperialism? As Marx and Engels noted in the German ideology, all ideology is the ideology of the ruling class. That is, devoid of ideological and political education, the working class has no special insight into the harms of imperialism per se. However, the development of revolutionary consciousness is ripe for the taking. The international capitalist class, despite their constant clashing and intercapitalist competition, is united in opposing socialism. They are united in opposing the nationalization of resources and the liberation of workers from wage slavery. Our task is to be united in fighting for our class interest, in international solidarity towards socialism and against class collaboration. If you are a communist in the US and you oppose imperialism, you should join a revolutionary organization and fight to organize the working class domestically and internationally. Let me revise that. If you were a worker, you should be a communist and impose imperialism. Join an organization that is part of an international and has organizational ties to communist parties and nations around the world. There is, in my view, no other way forward that is productive than this form of struggle. I look forward to our conversation, and thank you again for giving me this opportunity to speak with all of you today. Thanks.
All right. Oh, sorry, hold on.
Should I turn my mic off?
Probably, yes. All right, we'll start the responses. So each of you will get 3 minutes each, probably starting from Julie and then making way to Jonah. And then after that, we'll open it up to floor Q&A, so get questions ready, good stuff. All right, we'll start with Julie. What do you have to say, I guess?
Okay, well, I'd like to ask both of my fellow panelists, given that what they think about what we need to do today, given that the attack, okay, so the last article I saw said that the U.S. had attacked 7 different countries, which I had only thought there were 3, but in fact there's 7. So the U.S. bombed Syria. Everyone knows what happened with Maduro in Venezuela. I think it was Iraq. I can't even remember the other ones, but Nigeria was a really big one. That was the first one, actually. So what do both of you think we need to do today, and how should we get rid of U.S. imperialism? Because we're not here just, Lenin's book on imperialism, The Highest Stage of Capitalism, does give us the resources to go forward today. So that's my question to both of you, what do you think we should do today?
Should we respond directly, or?
I would guess you can respond in your response time, and you can also respond if an analogous question comes up from the audience. So we would go to Mychal next.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate both my panelists. I don't have much disagreement. One thing that I appreciated from Jonah was the understanding that, when we speak of imperialism and colonialism, the importance of understanding that it's not simply a policy, all right, of sort of foreign policy measures. Generally, when people speak of these things, they're simply speaking of them as policy measures, sort of not directly central to the production of capitalism. So I appreciate that as well. What I want to say is that one of the questions was I think it had to do with the shift. Has imperialism changed in the century since Lenin's pamphlet? And one thing I can say is the crisis of imperialism has sharpened, it has heightened, and in fact, what you see right now is a reflection of that crisis of imperialism. So we identify, we know that David Harvey has identified it as sort of, neoliberalism, and others and such use that language. We refer to it as the uneasy equilibrium. And we define imperialism in crisis as we argue imperialism is suffering because colonized people who came under imperialist rule are now fighting back and reclaiming our resources. It's in that struggle. So I think that we have to lift up and defend the anti-colonial struggle. Of course, here in the United States, I represent the Uhuru movement, the African People's Socialist Party, who in 2022 came under attack for our anti-imperialist activity, and most of the organizations here, without a doubt, defended us, and I think allowed for us to sharpen our relationships with each other. The Alliance of Sahel States, AES, that has to, of course, be upheld. And then also sort of explanation of other anti-imperialist coalitions that we don't necessarily identify as revolutionary, but at least sort of explaining them as such to the people, things like BRICS and other sort of movements that we see emerging at this time, at the very least representing the emergence of anti-imperialism. What we can say is, and I'll just end with this, is that with this crisis of imperialism, we say that sort of it's like a dying beast, right? And the only problem I have with that is I mean to not insult beasts, by comparing it to imperialism, but like a dying beast, they become even more dangerous after they've been fatally wounded. Yeah. So a dying imperialism is a dangerous imperialism. But what we see right now is the weakness. So the way that it's changed over the last century is that it's weak, and the position of the colonized and the oppressed and the anti-colonial people within the colonizer populations has grown. So that gives me promise for the future. Thanks.
And then this one, yes. And then to Jonah.
Is this on? Okay. I'll leave more in the way of my own analysis for the direct Q&A, but just some clarifying questions. Julia, I hear your criticisms of the labor movement, of other left organizations. I'm not entirely familiar always with the Spartacist program. I have read your article, American Imperialism Turns the Screws, if that's correct. But I suppose my question is, I hear these criticisms, but what is it that you're doing in terms of organizing that opposes these things? Like, how is it that you're going to unite the international masses? How is it, because I'm in a union, I don't know of any of your membership in our union leadership. What's the programmatic aspect that's going to get you from point A to point B? Because, insofar as I hear the criticisms of my organization, of other organizations, it's useful to put forward your own agenda. And so I'd just like to hear more about that. And then from Dr. Odom, you use the term like imperialism and colonialism a lot. Mm-hmm. And I'm interested, are those separate categories for you? Are those the same? In my analysis, colonialism is something that predates at least capitalist imperialism, as Lenin would describe it. And so I'm interested in, like, to what degree do you disentangle colonialism from imperialism? Are they, coterminous, events in modern history? So yeah, those are my questions for my co-panelists, but of course, I'm very looking forward to hearing what the audience resonated with, both in my remarks and those of my co-panelists.
All right. So with the response section done, I think we can move on to audience Q&A. So please raise your hand if you have a question. Yes, you in the front then.
This is primarily for. This question is primarily for Dr. Odom, and it's primarily asking, what do you believe is kind of a more important priority at this point? Would it be radicalizing a lot of the black, and primarily a lot of land-back movements and kind of anti-colonialist movements into a more pan-Africanist leftist direction, or would it be radicalizing a lot of the more Marxist or leftist organizations in the global north, primarily more towards a kind of anti-colonialist direction?
Well, first off, we say the road to socialism is painted black. That's our belief. However, but there's a lot that's been written over the last few decades on how we differ from the standard understanding of what Pan-Africanism is. We say, even through Kwame Nkrumah's understanding says Pan-Africanism was at best an aspiration. So Pan-Africanism essentially, in its translation, means all Africans. So in its literal translation, we agree with it. However, we disagree with the way through which Pan-Africanism explicitly has become really an expression of African petty bourgeois aspiration. Now, of course, people try to resolve that contradiction by way of Pan-African Marxism and other sort of Pan-African socialisms and things like that. But for us, we understood the importance 50 years ago with the creation of an African, an all-African tradition of historical materialism, dialectical materialism. 1975, Chairman Omali Shatella published something called a pamphlet that a lot of people read, not just the APSP. There was a group called the Sojourner Truth Organization, the Prairie Fire Organizing Committee, and other groups that came out of the Students for Democratic Society had read it. It was called Colonialism, the Major Problem Confronting African People in the U.S. And there was a lot of points in that basically laid the basis for the development of African internationalism. So what I would say is that there's not an either or, right? There's an organization some of y'all might know of called Unión del Barrio. That's probably our closest organization that's not directly inside the Uhuru movement. We've held a 40-plus year fraternal unity with Unión del Barrio, and much of their ideology, which they identify as Raza internationalism, was developed through unity and struggle with us as well. We have an entire contingency of white solidarity called the African People Solidarity Committee, formed in the fall of 1976, so 50 years already. So it's a party-style formation underneath the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party, and they're African internationalists, right? So Audre Lorde says feminism is for everybody, African internationalism is for everybody, because it's a historical materialist theory and practice, which sees the true liberation of all people, from the colonized and the colonizer populations, and the destruction of colonialism. Hopefully that kind of spoke towards it, so it's not sort of because it's kind of interesting. But yeah. So it's not an either or question of sort of like national struggles or worker struggles. It's both and.
All right. Do either of the other panelists want to, respond to anything that Mychal is saying, or any other residual concerns you might have had from previous questions?
I can respond to it.
Just quick, can you hear me? Yeah, just quickly to respond to your question about what are we doing these days, actually, because that is the question, right? We don't want to just talk about stuff, we actually want to organize in the real world to do stuff. So one of the examples I can just think of off the top of my head is recently in Los Angeles, which is where all the anti-ICE raids started back in June. There were two transit workers, Sean and Jaime, who were fired for speaking to the press. They were bus drivers, and they spoke to the press and said that they would not let the ICE on their buses, and they were fired just for speaking to the press. And so we joined in organizing the rest of the left. I think it was the DSA, FSP, the Internationalist Group. I'm forgetting the whole list, together with the smart bus drivers and the transit workers, to come out and actually defend them and call for getting rid of the, getting rid of the, rescinding their firings. And so their firings were rescinded, they're still fighting for back pay. But again, that's just one small example, and I won't, if you look at our paper, we've got lots of, like right now, I haven't had a chance to read it, but the New York nurses are on strike in New York right now. And we're fighting alongside the nurses in New York City. So that's just one example.
Right on, and I'll just add to that, what's being done. It's not a question of either, in actually many ways, reform or revolution. But at a time like this, if you are involved in reform that leads to revolution, right? So it's got to be a reform activities that organize the masses of people to be able to actualize their own independence and self-determination. There's a person just briefly by the name of, there's a person I saw, and she's an organizer with, I'll be honest, the Black Workers Center. And she had put forward something I thought was a completely reactionary post. She asked people why how are you going to join the talk about join the Black Panthers, because I guess this guy out of Philly has gotten a lot of press recently, when you couldn't even boycott Target. And my response is, the reason why you need to join the I think you should join my organization, African People's Socialist Party, but I would say the reason why you would need to join a revolutionary organization is because you can't boycott Target. You ask people to boycott individually, and I'll be honest, every time I'm looking for a place, every time I show up at an event, I hold my breath. Is this new coffee company that I bought, a group that I'm going to be told is on a boycott list? Shit, I didn't know. I'll be looking, is this the updated boycott list? Are they going to use this against me? Right? You know what I mean? So it's like, look, if your individual, y'all don't make enough money for your individual actions to tilt imperialism one way or another, right? That's why you need to be in revolutionary organization. This is important because in the 1980s, my party led the defense of the homeless in Oakland, California, and a very beloved professor and communist came and says at our forum, well, how are you going to organize the people for revolution when they don't have homes? It's like, that's why you got to organize the people for revolution, because they don't have homes. Like, what are you talking about? Right? So we have like a list of 7 different tactics and strategies that guide us in the African People's Socialist Party, which allow for us to organize people on the mass level, but direct them towards a liberation. And the very first one is to win the masses of African people to the position of independence. Understand, and what we say is, because a person has not been won to a position of independence, to not assume that that person is anti-independence. We define anti-independence as integrationism. We define pro-independence as self-determination. Too often people make it seem like the opposite of integrationism is separatism. That's not correct. The opposite for African people would be self-determination. There's other steps beyond that, which especially have to do with sort of organizing white solidarity and international solidarity and things like that. But the very first step is to organize people to the position of independence and self-determination.
Right.
And we do that.
All right. I believe we have some more questions in the audience. Let's see what we have here. I think we'll start with the man in the Arizona hat question. So I think,
Give me a second.
so
I'm
do we
gonna
have
grab
a,
this mic.
do we have a second mic?
Yeah.
That's great.
How much time do we have left on the panel?
We got like another hour.
Oh, here we go.
Another hour and 10 minutes or so.
There we go. Okay.
All right,
Look at
thank
that.
you all. So I think everybody on the panel agreed that imperialism is not simply a matter of capitalist policies, right? So it's not simply a matter of, like, if we just change the policy of imperialism one
That's
way or
correct.
the other. And I think everybody agrees that, solidarity with the workers and the oppressed, like various forms of organization. So I think everybody's agreed there. I want to pick up on something that Mychal said, that fighting colonialism is like fighting gravity, right? So Mychal was pointing to there's something historically specific about the problem of modern imperialism, right? That we're not just fighting the Romans, like there's a historical specificity.
That's correct.
to it. And Mychal said that capitalism is a colonialism problem, not that colonialism is a capitalism problem. So I wanted to invite Jonah and Julie to respond to this, because the way that we consider, the history of the problem is also kind of setting up what it means to overcome the problem. Okay, so what is the origin of the modern problem of imperialism? So for example, Tariq Ali, the New Left Review, once speculated, and this is actually kind of a common view with many on the left, that the modern American imperialism begins with the US Civil War. Abraham Lincoln is the beginning of the imperial American state, right?
Center.
Industrialization, all of that.
Yeah.
Jonah and Julie, where does the problem of imperialism start? Is capitalism an outgrowth of colonialism, or is colonialism an outgrowth of capitalism? What does that mean? And specifically, how should we understand the origin of American imperialism? Could we speak to the history of capitalism? And then Mychal obviously will have to what they say.
That's interesting.
Do you mind if I
I'm
respond?
sorry, what was the last thing you said?
The origin of American imperialism. So like Tariq Ali says, it begins with Lincoln.
That's interesting.
Okay.
Right? So how should we understand the history of, the American Revolution as leading to capital, So for example, Jonah, you said that a lot of the left has this sort of moral category between the labor aristocracy and the oppressed, right? And this is a sort of moralistic as opposed to, and it's a debasement of the way that Lenin is understanding the labor aristocracy, right? And Mychal, you said that Lenin is still Eurocentric, right? And that he's still thinking about capital from the European perspective out.
Right.
Right? So how should we, to maybe kind of bring some clarity, how should we
And
understand?
that's not like a subjective thing, right? I'm not saying he's a racist or anything. I'm just
Sure.
suggesting that he's.
But it's a matter of how we conceptualize
That's
the problem,
correct.
the
That's
problem
correct.
of
That's
capital.
correct. That's correct.
Sure.
Right?
Do you mind if I respond?
I'm sorry, so your question
Is what's the origin of the modern problem of imperialism? Right?
Yes,
Because
okay.
Mychal said we're not fighting Roman colonialism. Right? There's a specific problem of modern imperialism. Right? So how is imperialism coming out of the problem of capitalism? And then specifically, because obviously, it's America, like American Empire or whatever. So like, how do we understand the origin of, Pax Americana, right? Like, how do we understand the origin? And I'm raising the provocation of Tariq Ali saying it starts with Abraham Lincoln. It's like it starts in the, destruction of the South, right? Because the South is also saying, the Union is colonizing us, right? So like, like how do we understand like the origin of the American Empire, right?
And they colonized 4 million Africans. Exactly, right? So it's like,
It's a good question, and it's a technical question in many respects. I mean, I know that Dr. Odom referenced the Vivek Chibber article in Jacobin, which was kind of given new life to the Brenner debates vis-a-vis Origi and world systems theory about the origins of capitalism. I don't know that that's always like the most productive question to practicing politics today, but nonetheless, like from a theoretical perspective, it's interesting and important. First of all, I would say that in terms of the origins of imperialism, we have to understand imperialism as growing out of finance and monopoly capital. So in Capital Volume 2, Marx talks about the issue of turnover and fixed capital, and basically there's a tendency when haute bourgeoisie capitalists, industrialists, want to be able to finance the expansion of machinery and invest in fixed capital, they have to take out loans from some financial institution because there isn't enough profit and savings just lying around to finance the expansion of the enterprise. This gives rise to a necessity for finance institutions to be able to loan large sums of money to industrialists in order to allow for this expansion of capitalism that gives rise to cities as opposed to agrarian forms and all of these things. The point of that is to say that at some point in the history of capitalism, I'll just throw out 1870s to 1890s Europe, you have a concentration of finance capital in collaboration with industrial capital, and it starts to have a hunger for an outside to capital, right? The domestic working class in the imperial core, or what will become the imperial core, their wages are too high because they have a labor movement, and you need lots of raw materials to feed this new capitalist leviathan, so you reach out through conquest and the creation of new markets, real subsumption in the periphery in order to bring in the raw materials to allow for the expansion of industrialization. That sounds very boring, and it's important to understand historically, but one of the advantages of a Marxist point of view is to recognize that we see things and do analysis immanently from within capitalism. So there's no way for us to think from a feudal perspective or to think from Lenin's historical perspective in this moment, right? Our ideological frame is determined by the current conditions of capital. And from that perspective, we have to understand imminently what we can do about it. And for me, and people might disagree, the origins of American imperialism as such don't necessarily provide much insight into what can be done to undermine it. I'm skeptical at times even of talking about American imperialism as such, because I don't think that it's adjoined to the nation state the way that might lead. I mean, we have global financial institutions, multinational corporations today. They're not embedded in the nation state system that way. So I hope it doesn't seem like I'm dodging your question, but in many respects, yes, I could give you a long theoretical argument and lots of people would disagree and there'd be very heated debate about it. I don't know that translates into anti-imperialist politics today.
You would say colonialism is a capitalism problem, not that capitalism is a colonialism problem.
I think we're in capitalism, so if you want to do anything about colonialism, you have to do so vis-a-vis the totality of economic and social relations. If I were addressing colonialism in some pre-capitalist formation, maybe that would be relevant, but to me, there's no way to like extricate capitalism or colonialism or abstract it from the necessary embeddedness of those phenomena as together in this moment. But, okay, did the decolonial moment in the 70s like end capitalism in the places where it occurred? No, right? Like new national bourgeoisie formed all throughout the decolonized world. Some of it was Soviet aligned, and that happened later after the collapse of the Soviet Union, but nonetheless, like, the formal abolition of colonialism does not necessarily undermine capitalism as such. It's still something that we should fight for as people of the left, because colonialism is a base wrong and suppression of bourgeois rights and is antithetical to the development of socialism eventually. But the two things can't just be collapsed into one phenomenon.
Okay, so I'll just try really fast. So, we think that it's time to finish the Civil War, so we do think that imperialism does begin with the Civil War, and we do agree with, Marx writing to Lincoln in defense of the North in the Civil War. And so the question today is really, again, how do we topple U.S. imperialism? This is where, as I said in my presentation, this is where not only the colonial and neo-colonial and imperialist oppression of the rest of the world that's going on in front of us today, from the Palestinians to the bombing of Nigeria to the suppression of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. The point is that we have to smash U.S. imperialism. So what that means in the United States is not, again, so that comes down to, what do people think about the Democratic Party? Should people have voted for Kamala in the elections against Trump? Or should they have voted for the PSL against the Democratic Party? Like, the question of, we cannot have a revolution in the United States without the mobilization of the working class to fight for black liberation. If we smash U.S. imperialism here, that would liberate Africa, Asia, and the rest of the world. So, I don't, anyway.
Can you say that last part? Your last one, I feel it was important. Maybe I can respond to that. About fighting against imperialism here, liberating Africa, Asia.
Oh, okay.
All right, so I'll try my best. So the problem is that, again, as I said in the elections, basically, this has been true of the United States for the last 50, 60 years, right? What is the answer that the left and the working class has pushed? Is vote for the Democrats. Vote for your capitalist oppressors. The CPUSA has voted for the Democratic Party for over 80 years. What are the obstacles? Why are we where we are here today? It's because the working class has not been mobilized in their own interest to oppose their own capitalist class, okay? And so...
Julie, with all due respect, that's very silly. The Democrats as a bourgeois political party are not our capitalist oppressors in some, grand sense, no more than the Republicans are our capitalist oppressors. Capitalists are our capitalist oppressors. And you can't collapse that into the formation of electoral politics and say, oh, well, did we make the choice to smash imperialism or did we vote for Kamala Harris? Those are not like terms. They can't be...
Well, that's what happened. So here we have...
No, it's not what happened. Because if people didn't vote for Kamala Harris, it wouldn't have smashed imperialism.
But I mean, that's
Let me
different.
finish, since you guys had a chance to talk an awful lot, and I haven't talked that much. The point is, this is what the left needs to confront. He brought it up, reform versus revolution. That is the key question that is at stake for the liberation of workers and minorities and everybody in the United States that is oppressing the rest of the world. And now I just forgot what I was going to say. But my point is, the key question is the Democratic Party. Do you build a workers' party in opposition to the Democratic Party. The problem is that liberalism has basically pushed workers into the arms of the right wing. And the black working class in the United States is a key component of the working class. There cannot be a revolution in this country without black liberation, and the working class fighting for black liberation, and that could liberate the rest of the colonial world.
Which is actually an important thing, because see, someone said, we're going to call for, after Venezuela, and maybe this was even before Renee Good was killed, saying, we're going to call for when all the workers leave, a general strike. And I'm like, workers not going to walk off their damn jobs because of Venezuela right now. I mean, the reason why I say that, that's not a reactionary point. That's sort of like, as an organization, you're supposed to.
Why don't they?
So that's the important point. So the question is, how do we get people to that?
Right.
And so this is the point you're making,
Yeah.
because when you go and read W.B. Du Bois, Black Reconstruction in America, he says there's only been one real general strike in the United States, and that's when the slaves left the fields during the Civil War.
Yeah.
So you want to talk about sort of the origins of worker revolutionary activity. Workers left the fields. Workers demand control of the means of production.
Yeah.
Now, all this requires even sort of reorganization of what we understand as workers. Because you still got some Marxists running around seeing people who as slaves as not workers. I mean, I love E.P. Thompson's the making of the English working class or something like that. Very vital book. Came out the same year as C.L.R. James's second edition of Black Jacobins, 1963. But it says like the Caribbean exists only once inside the like the whole book. So for him to make it at the English working class is a bunch of European workers inside England, but where's all the resources that are coming from them? That's the colonial question. I think we have to sort of reconfigure even what we understand are workers, because socialist revolution has never happened where Marxists thought it was going to happen, and so I think that's part of it. The other question is sort of. We don't believe in socialism in one country and things like that. What you've had in the 1970s, 60s, 50s, and things like that, going even back to is you've had socialist parties lead revolutions, but of course, for us, communism has to be a global system. But I do think some of the clear contradictions were of those anti-colonial movements were observed. So I think the general question here is where would we see the origins of imperialism and then the origins of American imperialism? And of course, the origins of American imperialism is grounded in the origins of imperialism. I mean, or at the very least, because I think you were talking about the connection between finance, capitalism, and but then you said the 1870s. You're talking about 270 years before that. There's the creation of the Virginia Company of London. Before there's people in Virginia. Right, so when we talk about sort of the way, and then so I would say that. So yeah, we can move to some more questions.
Yeah. So I think
the only reason I was responding because it was said that I should respond to the
Can
people.
Jonah respond to the question about the Democratic Party impasse to global capitalism?
But then we'll move on. We'll move on after. Yeah, exactly.
I wanted to get some more questions, and I can just incorporate the answer. Just quickly? Okay. I don't know. They're bourgeois political parties. The CPUSA doesn't endorse Democratic Party candidates. This is known. It's public information.
It's false.
That's not false. It's true.
We can take that up, but let's just, okay. We had
With Nelson.
Does this work? Hello.
And where's the sister that was right there? She had her hand up earlier, but did she leave?
Hi, Nelson Lichtenstein. My affiliation is Faculty Association, University of California, trade union. Okay, so we're this.
What's your name? Nelson Lichtenstein?
Nelson Lichtenstein.
Oh, okay, I thought you said Alex Lichtenstein. Okay.
I want to just comment on this this debate about the origins of colonialism, and you mentioned Chibber, and the argument. I mean, let me put this preface it by saying that certainly in the 17th, 18th century, the Barbados, a slave society producing, enormous quantities of sugar, was like, the absolute engine of colonial capitalist imperialism. Okay, no doubt about that, and then you can find that throughout the West Indies. But before that, and this is the argument that the Brenner is making, and I think Chibber was making too, is that there was a class war in England by the landlords against the peasantry and against the yeomen, and that class war, basically, the enclosure movement, basically expropriating primitive accumulation, expropriating basically the kind of the peasantry. They were immiserated anyway, but even more so, and that created the capital, which the landlords and then the merchant and then the state as well could use to create this empire in West Indies and other places. Now, this is not just a historical academic thing, because one of the things that William Alcuin Williams made, the point he made, and here getting to your question about the 1870s, he was making the argument that American imperialism, which begins to reach a climax 1898, and afterwards, of course, is really based upon the failure, the immiseration of the American working class as it's emerging, and the lack of a market in the late 19th century and the 20th century. And so you look for markets abroad. And that was, in a sense, that's what's happening. I mean, it happened in the 16th century in Great Britain, happened in the 19th century, 20th century in the U.S. That's one reason that a vigorous, robust, successful trade union movement, putting aside the question of revolution for a moment, which can raise the standard of living of the working class, that reduces the incentive of the capitalists, or the capitalists can make money, in a way at home. And actually the country today, which is, I think, most imperialist, I think it is China. China has a policy of keeping the standard of living of a billion people low, so they have to export. They have to have this sort of predatory export regime, which is creating havoc all over the world.
Thank you for this.
I'll stop.
What do you have a question for the panelists?
Oh yeah. Well, my question is, I'd like you to comment on this issue of the both of you, at least two of you, comment on this issue of the origins of imperialism. Yeah, in terms of the question of class struggle at home versus abroad. That's the issue. Okay.
Well, I saw one historian recently. She referred to, she was talking about the Trump doctrine, what they're calling the Trump doctrine in relation to the Monroe Doctrine. And she said, well, it's pretty interesting that the Monroe Doctrine we went from the Monroe Doctrine as an anti-imperialist position to this pro-imperialist Trump doctrine, and I was like, wait a minute. So you thought the Monroe Doctrine was an anti-imperialist?
It was always
Right. So I'm sitting there thinking, oh wow, like you really do think imperialism is just simple. So the one of the contradictions that I would always say is that I say the United States had, which is like the inverse of the British, is that its colonized was first and foremost inside its borders, right? So to suggest that the origins, and this is all due respect to Tariq Ali, suggest that the origins of American imperialism has to do with the sort of North versus South Civil War is ridiculous, if you ask me. Because I mean, I would without a doubt suggest the origins of American imperialism is Europe taking its refuse sending it over here, allowing for them to steal the land and the lives and the labor of African and indigenous people, and from that to sort of elevate their class position. And that becomes essentially a process that we see replicated, Australia, New Zealand, Israel, South Africa, wherever you want to see it, which is sort of a central contradiction. I don't know if I'm directly answering your question, though. I do want to say that we need revolutionaries and organizers everywhere in society, and that we believe in a political or style of organizing that doesn't cede any territory to the colonial capitalist bourgeoisie. So that means in labor unions and student organizations, the electoral politics and things like that. So yeah.
We can move on to the responses of the other panelists as well.
Sure. First of all, I wanted to apologize for interrupting you. You made a direct attack on my organization, and I felt a little sensitive and want to say something about it. In any case, Professor Lichtenstein's our resident historian here. I'm not a historian. I'm less literate in this, and I don't want to comment on something that I don't know about. But pertaining to I guess I should make a distinction between imperialism as a larger category and capitalist imperialism in the way that Lenin is describing it. There's plenty of colonial plunder and international exploitation predating capitalist imperialism, and maybe this seems like a dubious distinction, but that was the impetus for why I dated it the way that I did. In terms of contemporary China, I think that there's an issue with confusing imperialism with like what Adam Smith would call mercantilism. The kind of, you could say that, yeah, they stockpile a lot of hard currency and they have an export-oriented economy. I wouldn't describe that as predatory. I think that's predatory from a bourgeois economic perspective. I don't know that it's predatory if you're interested in the building of a base of social democracy within China, but we might disagree on that. In general, I think the main thrust of what I've said and why I think it's important is like we really need to be clear about the analytical categories that we're using. I think at a polemical level, it's very useful to say like, oh, we spend so much money on military spending when we could be spending that on like social democracy here. Even though the period in the United States with like the greatest social democracy was funded through military Keynesianism and the expansion of the military industrial complex. So there's an issue with saying, trying to connect the dots in this very like rough and ready way. I think that being particular about our terms is really important, and at the end of that, it still doesn't dilute the issue that class struggle in the United States and all over the world is our primary task. So it's not to say like, oh, if we add specificity, if we add nuance, we land in like being immobilized and not able to practice politics. It's actually to say when we add specificity and nuance to our argument, we get a clearer picture of what is to be done, which to me is building a mass movement, a popular movement with labor from the perspective of the working class and not, sectarian, intra-left, politics. That to me is not productive of the kind of vision that I want. But I appreciate the question because you're right to push me on like some of these details, and as the guy who's making an argument as to why details are important, it's relevant.
And I'd like to also give Julie an opportunity to answer this question as well.
Well, again, as I said, like the real question is sort of what do we do about U.S. imperialism today? Marx actually during the Civil War he did organize. He organized textile workers in England to basically take the side of the North in the Civil War, even though they might have lost their own livelihoods. That's what we mean by international class struggle to defend all of the oppressed, whether it be, black workers and immigrants or, under the gun of U.S. imperialism at home in Minneapolis and around the country today and internationally, which we're only seeing the start of. So the real question is not, the problem is, again, is all of these popular mass movements have been built on liberal bases for the past 50, 60, 70 years. And that is why we are where we are today, and why we have to basically have no alliances with any capitalist politicians, and basically try to build that workers' party and anti-imperialist united front.
All right.
I saw her hand early.
You wanna go?
I mean,
Yeah, let's get some.
after this, we can get some questions as
We
Sean
have
was saying from
questions,
students as well.
Yeah, we can get a couple at once.
Yeah. Do you want to collect some questions so that it's not?
Usually don't do staff.
No?
Okay,
Okay.
okay, that's
Okay.
They get buried.
It's your event.
Thank you. So we're all here. I think everybody in the room probably knows, imperialism is bad. But I know a lot of people who don't read into this stuff, and they're thinking, you know what? I'm an American. This is going to help me. I'm going to get maybe richer.
Right.
If we do this. I know people in the military, and they're like, you know what? We got a big ass military. Let's fucking use it. So I'm thinking, how are we going to convince people? How are we going to tell working class people that, you should be opposed to imperialism? So I know strikes are something we could do. What's something else that can tell people this is actually not something you should be rooting for? It's not going to help you in the long run in what you stand for. Normal people, everyday Americans, etc.
Great question.
In the early 1970s, our newspaper, late 1960s, early 1970s, our newspaper had a policy that if someone was in uniform, they get a free newspaper, right? So I think that, like we said, we have to understand first and foremost that through a serious campaign of U.S. counterinsurgency, those people have, and your question relates to the response of the brother in the back with the sunglasses, like how did people come to sort of positions? Some I'd say are sort of depoliticized. Others have embraced sort of reactionary positions, and the first is engaging seriously with the war of ideas. The second is to allow for them to visualize what victory looks like right now, right? So the programs of the Black Panther Party oftentimes refer to as survival programs, survival pending revolution, and we say that's not how we identify them. We, building off of Lenin, of course, we refer to them as dual and contending power institutions, right? So our party right now, if you go to St. Louis, Missouri, but also the long tradition of our party is about sort of building political and economic power, organizing workers, essentially African workers, but also all sort of workers and the oppressed for their own liberation through a variety of different ways. And things like that. We have a campaign to fight against gentrification and the theft of black land and homes in North St. Louis called the Black Power Blueprint. So to win participation in those programs so that sort of people can manifest. So we say, observation and participation is the greatest teacher. So we got to win those people to organization and however we can. In San Diego they got something called Project Llano. And the committee in opposition to the military draft and things of that sort. Both of those are sort of focused on the Chicano community, but really pushing back against the way through which sort of U.S. military has been a way to sort of work, go against that, really draw some of the most oppressed people into its ranks. I mean, we got to deal with the fact that 70-80% of ICE is Spanish-speaking people right now. But how do we get to that position, right? And it's sort of, they have a reactionary response to the alienation of workers, right? We need a progressive response, a seriously organized progressive response to that. And sometimes that has to do with organizing them while they're while they're actually in the workforce. If the Vietnamese will tell you who helped them win the war, It's the revolution we were waging here, and it's the fact that even the United States Army, United States military, had to fight its own war inside the United States military. Right, go and look up something called the USS Kitty Hawk, the USS Constellation, and the way through which black workers inside the United States military rose up against the United States military at the height of the Vietnam War. So that's the type of struggle that we need to promote.
Yeah. I'd like to give the other panelists opportunities to answer this question as well.
Do you like to go first?
You can go first.
Okay. Yeah, it's a great question, and these activities like speaking in these kind of fora makes up a very small portion of like what I do in terms of organizing, and the question that you're raising makes up the majority of it. I think that there is no organizing people in an anti-imperialist fashion devoid of abstracted from organizing the working class in general. When you do that, you end up in like weird reactionary territory. For instance, many people cited the reason for voting for Trump in 2016 was that he presented himself as the anti-war candidate vis-a-vis Hillary Clinton, who was very hawkish Secretary of State, led an illegal military campaign in Libya, and we all know how silly that is given Trump's pattern of governing, but nonetheless, right? Like it touches home for people. I don't want myself or my children to be shipped off to a war where they're going to fight and die and be harmed. That being said, I think organizing civil society, organizing the working class in general, when we build those relationships, we're able to get to the point where we can have conversations, not just about anti-militarism, but eventually, more theoretically rich conversations like the one that we're having today. But the way that you make inroads there is by participating and reaching people where they work and where they live. So trade unionism, where they work, organizing workplaces, tenants unions and things like that, where people live, community organizations. We do a lot of work with progressive faith institutions, churches, synagogues, mosques, where we want to organize people in general towards progressive causes that are most important to them, rather than proselytize, I'm a radical anti-imperialist and you should be one too, but reach people at the issues that are most important to them. And anti-imperialism and anti-militarism is an issue that's important to most Americans. It might not be number one on the list, but it's something that's going to resonate with them. And so I think that's ultimately how we reach people, is through a broader programmatic way of organizing. And anti-imperialism ends up being one component of a broader range of progressive causes.
Right. You got to use the mass issues to win people to revolutionary organization.
Well, if you look at our paper, Workers' Vanguard, we have it's called Workers' Vanguard for a reason, and it's got tons of articles directed at working class struggles that are happening right here, right now. From the UAW strike when it happened, I'm sure online we have articles on the nurses' strike in New York City right now. But my point is that we have to basically, so the thing is that the working class has, when a large number of them voted for Trump, they're in the arms of the right wing, as you said, right? And the question is how do we win them away from right-wing populism, left-wing liberalism to working class perspective? And the way you do that is you have to basically fight in the unions to replace the sellout leadership of the unions. And I'll give you a good example. So if people remember before the elections, or was it last year? I can't remember. It was either last year or the year before. When the ILA, the International Labor, the longshoremen on the East Coast, they went on strike while the U.S. was sending military weapons and money to Israel. They went on strike during that time. And they kept handling military cargo for Israel. This was a betrayal. This was a betrayal of... They were on strike. Yeah, they were on strike. And so
So they were on strike, but they
but
kept doing
they kept
Israeli stuff.
handling military cargo bound. Huh?
So they were not on strike.
No, they were on strike, but during their strike, during their strike, they were still handling military cargo going to bomb and kill the Palestinians. This was a betrayal. This was a betrayal of one of the largest and most powerful unions in the United States. And that is the task that we need to do to win them over. The only way you can win them over to understanding that it's in their interest to not only defend Palestinians abroad, but blacks and immigrants and white workers and Muslims and all other oppressed nationalities and peoples here in the United States means that they have to oppose their own capitalist rulers here at home. Okay? So, I'm sorry?
Can I clarify? So they were on strike, and yet the leaders of the union went away from that and still continued to...
They made an exception for military cargo.
Oh,
Yeah, they
okay.
made an exception and still handled military cargo. Okay? So there we have sort of just all in one place an example that keeps happening over and over and over again. So I was really glad you asked your question, because your question really goes to the heart of this whole discussion on U.S. imperialism, because basically capitalism in the United States was built on genocide and slavery, as everybody knows, right? And there were no unions in the United States until after the Civil War. And Lenin said, I'm sorry, I keep saying Lenin. Marx said you cannot have, can't have the liberation while in the black skin it is branded. I'm too nervous, I'm sorry, I mangled the quote. But anyway, my point is that when you look at the United States, it's the working class that has the power and the ability to smash capitalism in the United States and liberate the rest of the world from the yoke of imperialism. So what are the obstacles? Why is that not why are they missing in action, like I said before? It's because of this coalition building with our class enemies, and you can see that in the example I just gave you about that strike. So our answer is that, we have to have, draw a clear class line, expose the fake misleadership. What are the politics? What are the politics that are preventing this?
All right. I would like to open the floor up to more questions. Let's see.
They're like, wait a minute, my hand been up for a while.
Yeah, sure. Why not? Finish on here. And then we'll go on to you and me.
And time, what we got, 20 minutes or so?
Like around 30 more. 30, 40 minutes.
Thank you to the panelists.
You said
Everyone on the
2:30 because we
panel-
started a little late.
Oh, right.
So everyone on the panel is in agreement that we should be in favor of internationalism. What would you say in a situation where your form of internationalism picks up steam politically and is painted as imperialist and exporting a communist ideology to places it otherwise wouldn't be, either out of an anti-totalitarian impulse or as an anti-first worldist impulse? And what is the kernel of truth in that, if any? How does your internationalism harness and dialectically overcome, rather than merely oppose, tendencies under imperialism?
Can you say that again? Or maybe I can read it.
So,
One more time.
Yeah.
it's kind of a two-part
International.
It's a two-part question. So what happens if your form of internationalism gets confused with imperialism because people think it's either totalitarian or first worldist? And the second part is like, how does your international harness and dialectically overcome, rather than just oppose and like smash tendencies under imperialism?
Tendencies, what kind of?
Well, so, okay, how
sorry,
is it trying to dialectically overcome and not just smash imperialism?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, my bad.
Is
So, it's
communism
sort of
a hammer?
whatever question.
To understand what
I'll let others start. I'll be right back.
Can I start this?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well,
I mean, I guess the way I'd answer that is that we are for the international communist revolution to be exported everywhere. So I would just answer the people who think that's a bad thing and say, well, look, where does the economic exploitation of your country come from? It comes from U.S. imperialism, right? I mean, that's where the international refugee crisis comes from, is from the economic devastation of Africa, Asia, and Latin America by the rule of capital. So that's how I answer.
Yeah, I guess I have a slight disagreement insofar as I don't think that the reproduction of the global capitalist system hinges singularly on American imperialism as such. I think that, there are local capitalist economies, local capitalists are oppressing people through capitalist exploitation in those local contexts, and it's people on the ground in those countries that are going to form the workers' movement, the socialist movement that's going to liberate them. So the primary contradiction, in my view, is between workers and capital, not between some broader geopolitical formation of American imperialism. Obviously, American imperialism functions in that system's reproduction. There's plenty of evidence of the U.S. overthrowing popularly supported socialist leaders throughout the world in order to maintain capitalism in local economies. So you can't see it without it. The second point is, insofar as internationalism is concerned, the CPUSA is a Comintern legacy organization. We have fraternal parties in virtually every country in the world. And our analysis on international issues comes from the local analysis of our fraternal parties on the ground there. And I think that this is a real strength of being part of an international. I know that my Trotskyist friends have a slightly different understanding of what an international means, but nonetheless, I think that there is a real strength to having partners who share your mission in contexts all around the globe, who have the primary data and primary investment in struggle in those contexts. And it's through the interlinkages of those struggles all over the world that we're able to exert internationalism as a mechanism. So it's not just saying, I'm an internationalist, I'm for the liberation of the working class, but it's for the fact that, I can call up my friends in the Palestinian People's Party and understand what their analysis of their local conditions are, and we can strategize together, and I'm not speculating from my position in the US what the best course of action is there. And I think that this is a real advantage, and it's part of the reason why I was drawn to the CPUSA in the first place.
All right, I appreciate that. I appreciate your question. So African internationalism, as we define it, and my T-shirt says this, and I can show you if you like it. I can show you where to get one. It says defined as the revolutionary scientific and materialist worldview and theory of the African working class. This theory recognizes that European wealth and African impoverishment occurred as a result of the European attack on Africa, the division of Africa, the African slavery and dispersal, colonialism and neocolonialism, and the imperialist created capitalist economic system. So I guess the first question is sort of like, I think you had to do with sort of how is it not just sort of first worldist understanding of internationalism, and I guess what some might call top down. Well, for we understand African people as in the United States and all around the world as being connected, as being African first and foremost, right? We don't believe there was any sort of metamorphosis that happened by way of enslavement that turned African people into Brits or Americans or even Jamaicans and things like that. In many ways, and we do work with some people on the continent. It's even harder for people on the continent to not see themselves as the 50 plus divisions of what has been given to us as as Africa. So while some people, especially people who define themselves as Pan-Africanists, might see Pan-African unity as those 50 plus iterations of the colonial attack on Africa as all coming together with all their flags and saying we are one, or this liberal bourgeois, this petty bourgeois thing where people love to say Africa's not a country, and like that's their thing, like they catch people. I say Africa's not a country, but it should be, right? So the reason why we say this is because we know that sort of through imperialism and colonialism derives the power of Europe, right? So as Africa rises up, unites, erases those borders placed upon us, then becomes the process through which we see the withering away of all nations. Not just the ones in Africa. So that's the first question. But the second question is,
how do you counter, or not, how do you harness rather than just counter tendencies under imperialism?
okay, yeah. So I mean, you know, we spoken to that already, but what we did was our party in 1981 created something called the African Socialist International. We understood that it was African socialist organizations all around the world that need to have its own collective voice and speaking for its own interests. You know, we do actively oppose the way through which the Communist Party and the Communist International intervened in the self-determination struggles on the continent of Africa, identifying, I forget how many legitimate parties they saw, 5, 7, something like that. But essentially it had to do with them identifying the revolutionary parties in Africa that they felt served the interests of the Soviet Union at that time. So you get the elevation of the African National Congress, which we know has been a complete force of neocolonialism, but it didn't just start in 1994. It started all the way back with the creation of the Freedom Charter, which becomes the Constitution of South Africa, in which they try to say South Africa is for everybody or something like that, right? And then it ridiculously proposes sort of like the Africanist position of the Pan-Africanist Congress that says, no, Africa is for African people. So the self-determination of African people as if it's some sort of separatist position, right? But African people understand that sort of Irish people should have self-determination, right? Why is it when African people argue as such, it becomes separatism? Well, I'll tell you why. Because we know damn well that when African people sever ourselves from this social system, the social system collapses. So you have to be okay with the social system collapsing to truly be in unity with some form of African independence. But I just say that one other document. I go to the burningspear.store, purchase a book called The Uneasy Equilibrium, but an article that predates the African People's Socialist Party. It was created by a guy by the name of Max Stanford, later on named Muhammad Ahmed. But it was a group called the Revolutionary Action Movement in 1966. It's called the World Black Revolution. You should read that document, the World Black Revolution. That's where he says, he lays out what he calls revolutionary black internationalism. And with the creation of African internationalism, you really see sort of the organizational sort of, but we can see somewhat of a development of even the sort of African internationalist position a decade before in 1966 with that sort of World Black Revolution paper. So that's something you all should check out.
All right, so we're kind of running out of time here, so we have time for one last question. I had picked out you in the classes before, so I'll stick with that. And just as a note to our panelists, please make sure at the end of your response to this question to include some brief closing remarks if you have prepared some, or if you want to give a closing statement for the panel. Just hold on.
So I'm very interested in theories theories of imperialism post-Lenin. I think Jonah mentioned modern academic books like Empire by Hart and Negri. And also I kind of wanted to ask Mychal about, I guess, more contemporary theories such as neo-colonialism, the highest stage of imperialism by Nkrumah. And I guess you could say maybe some of these are deepening Lenin's initial understanding of imperialism, or maybe they're saying it's changed so much because it is mediated through institutions like the IMF, through the US's empire of bases, that it's changed so much that Lenin's theory is sort of obsolete. So I guess, yeah.
I just tackle. And is it related? Yeah, it's related.
I just want to add to that, is there a way that imperialism today, brings people together as opposed to, just emphasizing their differences at all? Is there anything that brings...
No, without a doubt. No. But I think what you mean is the social system. The social system, the reason why it's so important is because it is one that brought us together. So you're talking about just objectively how it brought people together. You're talking about that, right? Not like a kumbaya brought people together, but
yeah. What, insofar as it's brought humanity together,
right.
What does that mean for politics?
Okay, yes,
to,
exactly.
Just everyone
right.
pursuing their own national interest, right?
Yeah, no. Well, that's a good question. Well, I'll just start off. So, the national liberation of the colonized and the oppressed has to be the basis of struggle. But through that, one of the points that the African People's Socialist Party says that the objective friends of all of African people, the objective friends of African people, are all of the colonized of the world and the progressive sectors of European and Western societies, right? So we believe that sort of in our struggle to liberate African people, our objective friends are all other oppressed people around the world. So we need to sort of unite in that struggle. So it's not a separatist nation based, but it's understanding that sort of this is the linchpin of this whole social system. So that unity is important. But I forget what the main question was.
So Nkrumah's analysis.
Oh, okay. Just new reading. So yeah. So I would say go to the burningspear.store. 2 books, like I said, I mentioned the 2014 publication of something called An Uneasy Equilibrium, which I think is called African Internationalism versus Parasitic Capitalism. But I thought you were asking about reading.
Is it a deepening of Lenin's theory, or is it?
Oh, that's the point. So first, no. So the question is Michel Foucault, even though he's got problems. I think he'd be for sure Me Too'd if he was still alive. But Michel Foucault was asked, are you a Marxist? And his response was, no one ever asked Einstein whether he was a Newtonist or something like that. I think that the question, the main objective for Lenin was to wage international struggle. The main objective for Lenin was to create the sort of the dictatorship of the proletariat, right? So I think that in that sense it's not obsolete. It's only obsolete if you treat it like religion, as if ideas stop in 1920 or whenever he passed away, a couple years after that, right? So if you treat it as that, then it's obsolete. But if you understand it dialectically, then it's not obsolete. I'm a person who really believes that Marx, Lenin, Engels, so many of these other people were dialecticians, and I think that they would agree with what we came to. Like I said, Lenin himself understood the importance of the self-determination of the colonized, which is why he elevated the positions of M. N. Roy, even though they conflicted his own with his own thesis, right? So I don't necessarily believe that it's obsolete unless we treat it like religion, and then what he wrote in 1920 has to be understood like that. But if we understand it as the starting point and a place to look forward and backward from scientifically, then I think the work of Lenin should be upheld in political study. But I know the others.
I don't think
I don't know what your question was. I'm not familiar with Nkrumah, so I can't.
Kwame Nkrumah was the, but that's you gotta do that. That's self-criticism. You gotta make self-criticism for that.
I mean, yeah, there's lots of stuff that I haven't.
Kwame Nkrumah
what is the status of Lenin's pamphlet today? Has it been surpassed? Is it still relevant? And how does imperialism bring people?
Is it still bringing people together?
Is it bringing people together, or is it dividing people? Something along those lines. How do you view the theory of imperialism as furthering kind of collective politics of some sort? Yeah. That's my understanding of the questions.
Oh. Well.
Is imperialism the potential for socialism? Right. For Lenin, it's the potential for socialism. Right. The crisis of imperialism. So, like, is it still bad?
Yeah, we gotta flip it on its head. This is like it's martial arts, man. It's judo. You gotta flip it on its head. Hell yeah, it's on the attack, but when it's on the attack, you flip it.
It's also the potential for nuclear annihilation.
Of course.
Yeah, that's what they say, but that's not what they want. That's not what they want.
Do you have a preference?
Oh yeah. We're at time. So if Julie and Jonah want to close out and respond,
I'll go
then.
last.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sure everybody is burning to get lunch or use the bathroom or whatever, so I'll keep it quick. I think Lenin's theory of imperialism with qualifications remains kind of the gold standard here. Qualifications being Lenin's work is deeply historical, it's full of empirical data from his time that necessitates that we do empirical study of the economy and situation on the ground today, and so you have to theorize your present conditions in the way that Lenin did, and that means potentially coming to different conclusions.
Mm-hmm.
Insofar as imperialism, furthers our trajectory towards the realization of socialism, yes, if we act on it, right? I mean, you can't read economic history like a book and then at the end socialism is inevitable. I think we need to engage in struggle, and it brings us together insofar as the working class everywhere in the world is defined by a similar relation, that they are compelled to sell their labor power as a commodity in order to receive a standard of living. I think that remains a pretty good line to activate people, and it's one that brings people together insofar as we have a shared class interest. So for me, building a mass movement in and for the working class is the way forward. Imperialism being the current conditions of that necessitates that we do more empirical analysis, we update when necessary Lenin's, I think, very salient work. And just to close, I would just say it's been great to have an opportunity to discuss these ideas. I know that we've disagreed at times. I hope that those disagreements are generative of something positive, and I would encourage people to join an organization. It doesn't have to be my organization. I think that organizing in general is good, and so you should organize in a popular organization for the working class. And if it happens to be CPUSA, you can talk to me after about that.
Okay, can you hear me? All right. So, in conclusion, I'll just say some what I said before, which is, okay, so yes, I agree that Lenin's imperialism has stood the test of time, and any writings by Lenin and Marx, what are the majority of those writings? They're all against pilfering, all against the fake Marxists of their time, all against Bernstein, pilfering, all of the social democrats, the Mensheviks, the Mensheviks of their time. And guess what? We've got Mensheviks of our time.
All the people.
You know? And so I disagree with my CPUSA co-panelist here who said that it's okay to just build a mass movement. The question is, on what political basis are we going to build that mass movement? On what, can you hear me? What political lines? In alliance with our rapacious ruling class or against them? And because this is a real problem. Like, I've been active politically for a very long time, and the working class is in the worst place I've ever seen it in my lifetime. This is a big, huge obstacle that we have, And so this is kind of my point, is that you can't just, this is what, the reason why the Palestinians are in this horrible situation they are, Iran might be next, comrades. I was worried that I was going to have to write something today about Iran, but Iran is next, Other countries are next. This is not an abstract question. So it's a question on what political basis must we mobilize to defeat U.S. imperialism? Well, it means that we cannot have coalitions and liberal alliances with capitalist politicians. We need to mobilize the working class independently, fight to break them from imperialism, from thinking that, as you mentioned, the Latinas who are ICE officers and the blacks that are ICE officers and so forth. So my point is just that this whole idea of just liberal mass movements are the answer is not the case. It's actually a dead end. So I think that what we need to do is, fight to organize the working class, and that means exposing the misleaders who are pushing liberal politics. Thank you.
Not to prolong this any longer, I think that's a slight misconception of my point of view, and if you want to hear it in my own words, you're welcome to talk to me afterward.
And my last point simply will be to learn more, go get the Bernardsburg newspaper. And like I said, African internationalism is not a race nationalist position. It's an anti-colonial position open to all, and we have organizations open to all. Be it the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, African People's Solidarity Committee, and other mass forms of our movement. So if you're interested, you can also go sign our contact sheet over there. But go and get a copy. It's free for today. But thank you very much.
All right. I'd like to thank all of our wonderful panelists. And